We're here from Bringing Up Book Lovers. Today, homeschooling veteran and author Phyllis Wheeler, that's me,
And homeschooling mom, Sarah Boble, are here to prepare you for your next trip to the library. So today we're brought to you by excellenceinliterature.com, home of Janice Campbell's classic literature and writing curriculum for grades 8 through 12, because reading great books can change your life. So today we are actually talking about Grace Lynn's Before the Sword, which is a prequel to the live action Mulan, the Disney film. And my husband for Christmas got Disney Plus, where he found a good deal, so we got it. So we've been watching all the Disney movies. We haven't watched the live action Mulan yet, but we like Grace Lynn a lot, and so I thought, well, this would be a great thing to read before we watch the live action version. So, Phyllis, can you give a little summary of the book?
Yes, here we go. Young Mulan's little sister is bitten by a nine-legged spider and lies near death. When Mulan asks a healer for help, she finds herself going on a journey to gather certain plants that can save her sister. And what a journey it is, opposed every step of the way by a demon called the White Fox.
It's definitely a quest story. I feel like there's no knights, but it's definitely feels like, this long journey, like you said, where she's opposed every step of the way. Um, did you think it passed the good story test?
I do think so. Um, it has some unusual features. It feels very non-Western, although Grace Lynn is an American, she's reached into her Chinese roots, I guess, to write this book. And so it's got a foreign feel to it to me, which is good. I mean, why not? Let's learn more. So, and it's a quest. So she's on this quest, and various things happen, and unexpected things. And does she get her object? Anyway, it's a good story.
Yeah. So we actually also have read Where the Mountain Meets the Moon. That's Grace's Newbery winner, and it has the same feel as that to me. There's even like when I was in college and I watched Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that movie set in China. There's like all these fantasy elements, and this book is that way as well, where there's a need to suspend some reality because there's like a talking animal and an immortal being that becomes an animal and you're interacting with them. So, but I think obviously it's not supposed to be 100% real, and that's part of where she brings in the stories that are more common in China and are told there. So we're going to ask her questions about her research too, because I'm really curious as well. Um, so what do you think? Themes? There's quite a few, but the ones that come out most prominently.
Well, the one that's most prominent to me is um, this sort of gender expectations. That Mulan is kind of a large person and strong, and she's gotten flack her whole life from her family because she doesn't live up to the feminine ideals of being never speaking her mind, sitting around being dainty, and so on. While the sister does live up to these ideals, Mulan is really outside the family's normal expectations for what a female child should be like. And because she's like that, she is able to do this quest. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So it's called Before the Sword because while she's kind of being a warrior in some cases here, she's not using a sword.
Right. So in the movie, that's when she becomes an actual. She joins the Chinese army to fight the Huns. So this is like a prequel to that. And in the
Mhm.
movie too, I think the gender expectations is like one of the biggest themes. I also thought that like the loyalty to the family was came through really strongly in this book as well, and just like perseverance, because she really did have several points where it was like, okay, it might be time to give up. It's looking pretty bleak, but then Graceland just kind of weaves in part of another story from hundreds of years ago with a character that we had glimpsed a little bit of, and we understand why that character's role is fulfilled now. So yes, definitely the kind of the theme of the Mulan movies, definitely part of the book as well. What did you think about her character development of Mulan throughout the book?
Well, on this gender theme, uh, Mulan at the beginning really has a terrible self-image. Her family's been telling her that she's worthless, basically, and so she believes it. And I guess as the journey goes on, she realizes that she can do things and she is contributing to success of the mission. She's helped by these two immortal beings, and that's a nice thing. But she's also doing things herself.
Yeah. Yes. Um, so would you say like her confidence
Oh yeah, her
grows?
confidence grew. Yeah, grows. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And she kind of feels more comfortable in her skin, I guess. Um,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, she makes some decisions, and
Yeah.
like let's take that rock over there for our ballast, and that's that turned out to be a big decision. I mean, a major plot point, sort of. And
Mhm.
yeah, she made the decision.
I did also like that even though her like personality seemed to be like opposed to her sisters, she and her sisters actually had a really good relationship and really loved each other and were devoted to each other. It's not like they were like enemies or jealous of each other. So just like
Yeah,
different the women can and do coexist and can be have a sisterhood and be friends. And so I was glad that was there instead of her having this kind of resentment of her sister or something, just because it was easy for her sister to be what Chinese women were supposed to be, whereas it wasn't for her. Um, yeah,
true. Yeah, Mulan risked a lot in this journey to save her sister. That's the whole
yeah,
point.
yeah. Out of like genuine love too,
Right.
came across. So, um, how about memorable scenes?
Well, the rock that eventually transforms into a being, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely
And
part of the
yeah, yeah. And the horse, I don't know, I'm a horse lover.
yeah.
She so is Mulan. She has this horse for most of the book, and she's charging around on the horse, and she's got this. One of the immortal beings helping her is a rabbit, and so she's got him in a sling on her back because he is getting weaker and weaker for various reasons, and he can't, so he needs to be carried. So it's the picture on the cover is her, with this rabbit on her back. That's cool.
Oops, there we go.
What? Yeah. Now, what
Uh,
about you? Memorable scenes for you?
yeah, so I actually have like an overall impression of kind of the food in the book. I just really like food descriptions. So just like in the very beginning, just kind of the meagerness in the quest, and then um that one point where they're at it's like a restaurant. This, one of the immortal beings' friends has like a restaurant, and the food descriptions that they had in there. I don't know. That's one of the things that stuck to me the most, because I liked reading about how she was like starving and hungry and, hadn't had anything decent to eat. The rabbit and the horse could eat grass, but she was, um, and then she got to have this huge, like wonderful meal at that point. it was very gratifying. And the food descriptions sounded really good to me. So yeah, not really germane to the story at all or to the plot, but I feel like it was there for a reason to make you feel that way at that point in the book. So yeah.
I also enjoyed a scene near the end where she's in a garden.
Mhm.
Yeah, where it's a garden that's governed by a benevolent being, and yeah, it was just very peaceful.
Yeah. Yeah. She's a great writer, you know, win a
Yeah,
Newbery without being a great writer, but you know, if she wanted to communicate a peaceful feeling, it really did communicate a peaceful feeling. Wanted to communicate the joy of a feast, it's there too. So it was really fun to read that. Anything potentially controversial for homeschoolers?
I don't think so. Do you?
No, I mean, unless people like just don't like fantasy for some reason, you know, or like
Oh,
that, which I don't know. I have one of my kids is 5, and we read this all together, and he doesn't have any problem believing, you know, understanding what's real and what's not. So, but I think, you know, there could be people out there who have an issue with that. I don't personally know any, but I think I've heard of them. So,
yeah. The way the story moves forward is, you know, she's questing, she's doing something, and then one of these immortal beings will say, "Oh, let me tell you a story." And that's what they tell her a story about somebody doing something, and then this is something that happened a long time ago. But then the people in that story will show up in some way
mhm.
in Mulan's tale. Happens repeatedly. So that's also very cool. And it's also
Yeah,
very non-linear. It's not the way that we Westerners are used to thinking. So I enjoyed it. Uh,
yeah. I actually wondered if that was going to confuse my kids as we were reading it, but no. Maybe because they're young, they still have kind of a openness to things being different. So um, yeah, I really enjoyed it too. It was really fun to read. So, highly recommend for the literary value and the storytelling value and the descriptions and yeah. So we'll talk to Grace Lynn here just in for you a few seconds.
okay.
So we're here with Grace Lynn, which is super exciting. The author of, among other things, Mulan Before the Sword. And so Phyllis and I already kind of talked about your book a little bit, so people, potential readers would know, you know, what they're getting into, especially if they've never read anything by you before. Um, so I was actually just curious how it came to be that you and Disney came together to write a prequel for the.
Yeah, it was so it just kind of came out of the blue. I remember one day I was going for a walk and my agent called me up and she said, I just got an interesting inquiry from Disney Press. And she said, do you know how they're doing a new Mulan movie? And I said, yes, I do know that. She's like, well, they're looking for someone to write a novel to go with the movie. And I was like, oh, you mean like a um, you know how like the house a lot of times they just take the movie and they make it into a
Mhm.
novel. And I said, oh, you mean one of those? It's just no. They want something completely original. They want it to be a companion to the movie, but not of the movie. They want it to be like almost like to deepen the world, and they would really like you to do it. And so it was really intriguing. Because when I realized that it wasn't just taking the Mulan movie and making it into prose, when I realized they wanted actually something original and I could
Mhm.
actually have a lot of creative freedom, then it got really interesting for me. And that's when I decided that I would take the job.
Yeah. So this is just kind of a maybe kind of a dumb question, but I know some people are really like with the Chronicles of Narnia, people are really like, oh, you really have to read it in publication order, or like, no, you really have to read it in chronological order. Do you have an opinion about that, about whether the prequel should be read before watching the movie or?
um, I think that it's kind of fun to read the prequel before watching the movie because then all of a sudden certain things make sense, like the sisters' extreme fear of spiders all of a sudden makes sense, like, and why Mulan would would do certain things to save her sister from a spider, things like that. Like, I
Yeah.
think that reading it before is kind of a little more fun.
Okay, I'm glad you said that because that's what we're doing. Um, so I know you talk about this a little bit at the end of your book, but can you tell us a little bit about like your research and where, you know, a lot of the mythology and the characters have come from?
Sure. So if one of the reasons why Disney came to me is because probably my most well-known book is my book Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, and it's two companion books, Starry Over the Sky, When the Sea Turned to Silver, and those are a big, I would say, a big weaving and mix of mythology, real Chinese mythology, as well as an original story, with a very Asian American lens. And I think they liked that kind of mix because I think that's what they were trying to do with this new version of Mulan. Mix a lot of things, have an Asian American lens, since they're Disney, an American company. So I try to do what I do for my own books for this book because they gave me so much creative freedom. I wanted people who read my books to know this is a Grace Lin book. You know, it's not just a Disney book; it's a Grace Lin book too. And so that meant, you know, really interweaving a lot of real Chinese mythology into it. So in this book, you will meet. You'll be Lu Ping, who is one of the 8 immortals, and you will meet the Jade Rabbit, who plays a little cameo in some of my other books, but he is also a very real mythological figure in Chinese culture. So those are some of the people or creatures or characters in Chinese myths that I put in the book.
Okay. Phyllis, did you have a question you wanted to ask about kind of
I thought it was really interesting how you would, you know, one of the characters would start to tell a story, you know, like something that happened 100 years ago or whatever. And then, so they tell this story, and then, you know, pretty soon, as Mulan is moving through her quest, something from that story or somebody from that story will pop up in her Mulan's reality. I thought that was really unusual. I'm so used to just a strict separation between, you know, myth and the present. So I guess I'm curious, you know, how you came up with that.
Well, that's a technique that I don't want to even call it a technique. That's kind of the way I write. If you've read any of my novels, you'll know that I tend to do that quite often, a story within a story, like over and over again, and the stories interweaving and the layers piling up on top of each other. I don't know why exactly I write that way, but that is just the way I write. In fact, for this book, I thought I would try not to write that way. I was like, I'm going to try to do just a very linear story, like, because it's a book. But I was not able to do that and keep it interesting for myself. So I do tend to layer upon stories and have them interweave. I just like many of my, I'm also an illustrator, and one of the things that I love to do in my illustrations is put patterns upon patterns upon patterns in my drawings. So that's kind of like how I see things, and so that's kind of why I write that way as well.
I guess I'm curious about how or whether that is a Chinese style of writing, this layering.
I don't know if it's an Asian or Chinese style of writing, but it's definitely I think that the idea of patterns upon patterns is very, you see that in Chinese, mainly Chinese silks and Chinese clothes. Very often you'll see, you know, they'll have a, because a lot of my art, at least a lot of my early art is inspired by Chinese folk art and as well as Chinese fabric. And so they tend to put a lot of patterns upon patterns, and Chinese folk art just loves patterns everywhere. You know, like there's a big, the way that they describe Chinese folk art or the Chinese aesthetic sometimes is they have an abhorrence blank spaces. They like to have everything like embellished, you know. And I think there's a funny story somewhere that I read where like some designer had a factory in China make some shoes or something, and they wanted these really, really plain shoes, but they came back all like embellished. And the designer was like, "What's going on? What are these? Aren't the shoes?" And they're like, "Oh, we made them better for you." You know, so that's the aesthetic is a lot of things. And so that's kind of how I write. That's kind of how I illustrate, like lots of things.
Interesting.
So I read Before the Sword to my kids out loud, but we listened to Where the Mountain Meets the Moon on audio in the car, and we actually had to listen to it twice because of all the layering. Like, you know, if you just kind of zone out for 5 seconds, then you miss something. So yeah, that was I really love that, because the second time we listened to it, even though I didn't feel like I was zoning out at all, we were like, oh, making all the connections even stronger between this part of the story and another part of the story. And like, one of my kids is only 5, but he like piped up with something as well, and it was really kind of fun to listen to it that way. It was just so deep. It was one of those things where we could read it again in like 3 years and be like, oh, we didn't notice that happened as well. So
that's awesome.
I have a friend. Oh,
because
yeah.
I love rereading books over and over again. I still read the same, like I still reread Anne of Green Gables and that whole series from when I was a kid. So I think that's maybe because I love that so much. Maybe that's why I write that, with the idea that hopefully these books will be read again and again and new things will be discovered.
Yeah, I think you have to. Like, we read what's the Norton Jester?
The Phantom Tollbooth.
Yes, that book. Like, you can't just read it once. You know, it's just there's so much in there. So it's kind of like that, where you just have to keep reading it, you know, several times over the course of several years, and then eventually you figure out what the whole story was. So so I have a friend who's a really big fan, and she's actually an aspiring writer too. She actually wanted to know, like, the myths, were they told to you as a child? Were they researched? I'm sure it's kind of a mix of both, but how did you find?
Yeah, it's kind of a mix of both.
Yeah.
I would say, like, I was aware of like certain characters, but I didn't know many, like the many stories. Like, so when I was younger, I knew about the Jade Rabbit, like there's a rabbit on the moon, right? But I didn't know all the many stories about the Jade Rabbit. I found that the Jade Rabbit has all these really cool stories, like how the Moon Lady sent him to the Earth to get rid of a plague, and how he took all these different forms. And in some ways, he might still be traveling the world right now in a different form, saving people. So, the specific stories, a lot of things like that, are things that I found as an adult when I started researching.
And did you read mostly like primary sources for that kind of research, or I'm just curious?
I read all different kinds of things. I mean, I do not read Chinese, so most of my books that I read, I mean, I've read. I have a huge, huge library of Chinese folktales and Chinese.
Okay.
And Chinese folktales and Chinese mythology and all this, but they are all translated from Chinese to English. So I don't know if I would say they're first sources, because, you know, they've been translated.
Translated. Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Yeah, I think like it's kind of hard to think of a question to ask about the book because of all the layers without, you know, like going into like all these other places. So we were just really curious about the storytelling, which, like you said, is similar to other books that you've written. But I guess this might be kind of a weird question, but did you enjoy writing this book as much as?
I did. You know, it had a different flavor for me, which was really fun and interesting. It's much more action-packed than any of my other books, and also, you know, what I struggled with, but I think it's all right, is that, you know, one of the things was very important to me in these books, Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, Starry with the Sky, When the Sea Turns Silver, is that the main characters in those books, they go on big adventures, and they fall into a lot of danger, and they fall into a lot of traps, but they never solve any of their problems with kung fu or some kind of violent action, you know, because that was a really big deal to me when I was younger, because
Yeah.
you know, I was like one of the only Asians in my elementary school, and they're all like, oh, do you know kung fu, you know, like it was just like they all thought I could fight, right? Like like I was like a girl Bruce Lee or something. So I was like, and that was like a positive image of an Asian, you know, like, and it's not that you can't have Asians that do kung fu, but I wanted to have characters in my books that did not do kung fu fighting yet could still go on an adventure, you know, like.
Yeah.
And so when I was given Mulan, there was a little part of me that was like, oh, but it doesn't make sense if she doesn't fight, right? Because you know, that is her, like, she is the complete epitome of when you see a statue of a girl on a horse with a sword in China, everyone's like, that's Mulan, you know. Like, so if she doesn't have a sword, she's not Mulan in many ways. So so even though she does quite a lot of adventures, you notice that she only really touches the sword at the very end, you know, like, so because I wanted to make sure that the readers saw that she was able to overcome so many of her obstacles without the sword, you know, without the violence, and to figure out, she was able to use her brain, use her wits, find other ways to solve her problem. And it was only at the very, very end, when there was no other choice really, that she had to use the sword.
Yeah, cool. I love that. I didn't realize there was so much to the title. I thought it was literally just like before she became the warrior in the movie, but that's fantastic. I love that. Phyllis, did you have any other questions?
Well, you know, I saw Mulan, the animated movie with my children long ago, and I really had no idea that Mulan was a somebody in China. I thought this was just some, you know, Disney cooked up this storyline, but apparently not.
No, and I mean, that's what's so interesting, and that's why I think so many people who love the animation might have been upset with the live action. But the live action is actually much more in line with what is culturally relevant in China. I mean, Mulan is a very, very old folk tale figure. They're not, most people think she probably did not exist, that she's probably just a figure in a legendary song that they use to bring up the morals of their troops. But there were many female warriors in ancient Chinese times, so it wasn't like completely unheard of. But she's a very much beloved figure, and so that's why it was a little, that's why I think I loved writing about it, because I love taking these folk figures, I like taking these fairy tale figures and folk figures and kind of bringing them into the, I would say, more like modern accessibility. So because to me, I feel that folk tales, they change with every generation, because they're told orally, and so everybody who tells the story brings something new to the story. So it grows and grows and grows, and the way that folk tales stay alive is by their changes, you know, and by their growth, and by sharing, because they have to be accessible for each generation. So that's why I really loved being another teller of Mulan. I thought it was like a really lovely way of being a part of this long chain of people who have shared the story of Mulan. So that was one of the reasons why I really liked taking on the project.
Okay.
Oh,
That's awesome. Yeah, if you who are watching this didn't feel inclined to read the book before, now you probably do. So I would. So this is us talking to Grace Lynn, who we're so thankful that you came on to Little Old Us to talk to us about your awesome book. Make sure you go check out Before the Sword by Grace Lynn, not just for the literary value, which we all know is very high, but the story is just super exciting, and it's definitely a quest story. It's fun to read. It's fun to listen to if you're a kid. And yeah, thanks for being with us, Grace. Don't
Thank you,
forget to check us
Grace.
out. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm glad you liked the book.
I loved it. My kids loved it.